Subscribe to Sinister Shadows Studio, The Forgotten Performer. It was supposed to be a day of joy, laughter, and celebration. My cousin's 6th birthday party was being held at a local carnival, and she was ecstatic. As we arrived, I couldn't help but feel nostalgic, thinking back to my own childhood memories of cotton candy, roller coasters, and of course clowns. As the day wore on, the sun began to set, casting an orange glow on everything. That's when I spotted him. A lone clown, separate from the others, with a faded costume and a weary look in his eyes. He was standing under a dilapidated tent with chipped paint and worn-out fabric that read, "Rico's Magic Show." The tent looked out of place amidst the modern rides and attractions. It was as if it had been forgotten by time. Drawn out of curiosity, I approached the tent, the sound of children laughing and rides blaring in the background. The clown, whose name tag read Rico, looked up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Step right up, young man," he said in a raspy voice. "Care to see some magic?" The atmosphere inside the tent was different. It was cold, with a peculiar smell, like old books and mothballs. The walls were lined with vintage posters depicting various acts, and in the center was a small stage. I took a seat on one of the creaky chairs and watched as Rico began his act. His tricks were old school, pulling rabbits out of hats, card tricks, and some sleight of hand. Yet, there was an odd sense of unease. Every time Rico performed a trick, his eyes would lock onto mine, never blinking, never straying. When the show ended, I clapped politely, but something felt off. Rico approached me, and with a slight bow said, "Thank you for watching. Not many appreciate the old ways anymore." He then handed me a small, intricately designed box, a gift for being my only audience member today. Feeling uneasy, I quickly thanked him and left the tent. As I stepped outside, the carnival's noise and lights were overwhelming, a stark contrast to the quiet, eerie atmosphere inside the tent. I was eager to forget about the weird encounter and rejoin my family. But that night, as I prepared for bed, I remembered the box Rico had given me. I opened it slowly, and inside was a small porcelain clown figurine. Its features eerily resembled Rico's, from the faded costume to the weary look in its eyes. Feeling a chill, I placed the figurine on my bedside table and went to bed. Throughout the night, I had disturbing dreams. In them, Rico chased me around the carnival, his laughter echoing everywhere. No matter how fast or far I ran, he was always right behind me, his cold hands reaching out to grab me. I woke up in a sweat, my heart pounding. The morning light streamed into my room, and for a moment, I felt relieved, brushing off the nightmare as just a result of the unsettling encounter. But when I turned to my bedside table, the clown figurine was gone. Confused and slightly panicked, I searched my room, thinking it might have fallen. As I looked, I noticed something even more unsettling. My window, which I distinctly remembered locking the night before, was wide open. For weeks after, I felt like I was being watched. I'd see fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, or hear soft, eerie laughter when no one was around. The clown figurine never reappeared, but the feeling of unease never left. I tried to find out more about Rico and his tent. I returned to the carnival, but there was no trace of the dilapidated tent. I asked the carnival workers, but none of them recalled seeing a clown named Rico or a tent fitting its description. Desperate, I delved into the town's archives, where I came across an old newspaper article. The headline read, "Carnival Tragedy, Magician Found Dead Under Mysterious Circumstances." The article detailed the story of Rico, a once beloved clown and magician. Over time, as modern attractions took over, his performances lost their charm, and he was relegated to obscurity. One day, he was found dead in his tent, cause unknown. The article included a picture of Rico, and I froze. It was him, the same weary eyes, the same faded costume. And next to him, on a table in the photograph, was the same porcelain clown figurine. To this day, I cannot explain the encounter. Was it a spirit, seeking acknowledgement and validation? Or was it something more sinister? A reminder of the dark shadows that sometimes lurk behind laughter and joy. Whatever it was, the experience remains a chilling memory, a haunting reminder that not all clowns bring happiness. Eyes in the crowd. I had always been a lover of street festivals. The cacophony of laughter, the wafting aroma of street food, the colorfully painted stalls, everything about it exhilarated me. One evening, while exploring a local festival in my town, I was particularly drawn to the large crowd gathered around a performing clown. His costume was unlike any I'd seen. While most clowns dressed in bright flamboyant colors, his attire was monochrome, stark black and white. His makeup, too, had an eerie quality, with thick black lines running from the corners of his eyes down to his jaw, making it look as though he'd been crying ink. Despite his unsettling appearance, his act was mesmerizing. He juggled, performed magic tricks, and made balloon animals, all while maintaining an eerily perfect wide smile. The crowd was captivated, their laughter and applause filling the air. At one point during his performance, our eyes met. I instantly felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It was as if he was peering deep into my soul. Unsettled, I decided to move on, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. Hours passed, and I immersed myself in other festivities, slowly forgetting the unnerving encounter. As night fell, I began my walk back home, taking a shortcut through an alleyway. The festival's muffled sounds slowly faded behind me. Suddenly, I heard the distinct sound of a squeaky shoe behind me. Turning around, I saw a shadowy figure under the dim streetlight, the monochrome clown. Panic surged through me as he began to approach, his steps deliberate, that chilling smile still plastered on his face. I broke into a sprint, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Every time I looked back, he was closer, the distance between us shrinking. I emerged from the alleyway onto the main street, desperately searching for someone, anyone who could help. But the street was eerily deserted. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the welcoming lights of my house. I fumbled with my keys, throwing the door open and slamming it shut behind me. I locked and bolted it, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. Suddenly, a soft tapping echoed through the silence. I turned, horrified to see the clown outside my window, tapping lightly on the glass. His eyes locked onto mine, and he held up a balloon, shaping it into a miniature version of himself. Then, with that same eerie smile, he pressed a note against the window. "Always watching," it read. Terrified, I called the police, reporting a stalker outside my house. When they arrived minutes later, they found no trace of the clown, just the deflated balloon and the note. The officers took my statement but mentioned something even more disturbing. Over the past few weeks, there had been multiple reports of the same clown appearing at festivals and events, always fixating on a single individual and then stalking them. But every time they tried to apprehend him, he disappeared without a trace. For nights I couldn't sleep, haunted by the memory of his cold eyes and painted smile. I decided to do some research of my own, trying to find out more about this mysterious clown. My search led me to an old newspaper clipping from decades ago. It spoke of a performer named Ilario, known for his distinctive monochrome attire. Ilario had been the star attraction at various local festivals until a tragic incident occurred. During a performance, a fire broke out in the tent he was performing in. By the time help arrived, the tent was reduced to ashes. Ilario's body was never recovered, leading many to believe he had perished in the fire. Local legends spoke of his restless spirit, seeking an audience, forever trapped between the world of the living and the dead. The following evening, I visited the site of the tragic incident, now an abandoned plot. As the sun set, I could feel an eerie calm settle around me. Then, in the distance, I heard the faint sound of a carnival tune and the distant laughter of a crowd. There, under a ghostly tent, stood Ilario, performing for an audience of shadowy figures. Our eyes met once more, but this time there was a hint of sadness in them. As if acknowledging me, he took a bow, and the entire scene faded away, leaving me alone in the dark. I never saw Ilario again after that night. Maybe all he ever wanted was to be remembered and to perform for an audience, one last time. The incident changed my perception of street festivals forever. Now, whenever I attend one, I always keep an eye out, half expecting to catch a glimpse of the monochrome clown, forever trapped in his endless performance. The painted smile of St. James Street. St. James Street was a lively spot in my hometown. Every summer, it transformed into a carnival of sorts with rides, stalls, and performers filling the street. Growing up, I eagerly anticipated these festivities, yet there's one summer I wish I could erase from my memory. The summer of 1997 was the year the new clown arrived. Unlike the cheery and colorful clowns that usually visited, this one was different. His costume was simple, a faded yellow jumpsuit and mismatched oversized shoes. His face was painted ghostly white, with a large ruby red grin that stretched unnaturally wide. His eyes, rather than being painted, were surrounded by dark, hollow rings. He didn't hand out balloons or juggle. He simply stood still, staring into the crowd with a fixed, eerie grin. I remember the first time our eyes met. There was a coldness in his gaze, something deeply unsettling. It felt as though he wasn't just looking at me, but into the very core of my being. I quickly turned my attention elsewhere. As the days went by, I began to notice him more and more. Whenever I passed by St. James Street, even when not at the carnival, I'd find him standing in the same spot, always staring at me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to be creepy for the act. But it soon became evident that this wasn't an act. One night, as I was walking home, I felt an unsettling feeling that I was being watched. Turning around, there he was, a few meters away, staring at me with that same fixed grin. My heart raced as I quickened my pace. Every time I glanced back, he was there, maintaining the same distance. Panic surged through me when I realized he was following me home. When I reached my house, I quickly locked the door behind me, peeking through the window. To my horror, he was standing right outside, staring at the house, not moving an inch. I called the police immediately. By the time they arrived, the clown had vanished. They patrolled the area but found no sign of him. They suggested I stay with a friend or relative for a few days. I decided to stay at my cousin's place across town. For a week, I stayed away from St. James Street, hoping the clown would disappear like the temporary carnival stalls. But when I finally mustered the courage to return, he was still there, standing in the exact same spot. Things took a sinister turn when, one day, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a black and white photo of me, taken from a distance, with the clown standing eerily close behind, his painted face inches away from mine. The realization hit me. He was always there, lurking in the shadows, even when I hadn't seen him. I decided to confront him. One evening, armed with the courage from my friends who accompanied me, we approached him. As we neared, I noticed for the first time the fine details of his makeup. His skin underneath was scarred and rough, and his red-painted grin seemed to hide deep cracks in his lips. The paint wasn't just for the act. It was hiding something underneath. "Who are you? Why are you following me?" I demanded. He didn't speak. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket and handed me a crumpled old circus flyer. The date on it was from decades ago. It depicted a group of performers, and there at the bottom was a clown that looked exactly like him. I later learned from old-timers in the area that back in the 60s, there was a clown named Leonard who was part of a traveling circus. The circus had a tragic fire accident, and many performers died. Leonard was one of them. Locals had often reported seeing his ghost around, especially during summer carnivals. Did I encounter the ghost of Leonard? Or was it someone trying to embody him? I never found out. After that summer, the clown never returned. St. James Street returned to its lively, cheerful self in subsequent years, but I couldn't shake off the memory. Every time I hear laughter or see a painted face, I remember those hollow eyes and that haunting, painted smile. The true story of St. James Street's clown remains a mystery, but its haunting presence is forever etched in my memory. Subscribe to Sinister Shadows Studio.